Everyone in the capital was waiting for me, the cast-off wife thrown out of Prince Ning's household to end up wandering the streets. Then the emperor himself kicked over the grand chancellor's table in public, all because he wanted the last mouthful left at the bottom of my pot. A woman wakes up as the fat princess consort everyone in the capital mocks, cast aside by her husband and bled dry by her own family. She has nothing left until she walks into the kitchen. But when her cooking wins over the emperor himself, the family that once threw her away comes crawling back. The question is, will she feed them again or finally feed herself? Let's go. The instant my senses fully returned, a bitter taste flooded my mouth as if I had chewed a fistful of coptis root raw. Two maids stood trembling beside the bed. One held a copper basin. The other clutched a silk handkerchief as though it might save her life. The moment I opened my eyes, the maid with the basin jerked so hard that half a cup of warm water splashed across the quilt. Hey, Her Highness is awake. The other maid spun around as though she had seen a ghost and bolted for the door. In her haste, she nearly tripped over the high threshold and went sprawling face first. Me lips twitched. I would have laughed if sitting up had not proved an impossible luxury. The moment I braced one elbow against the mattress, my chest felt as though a millstone had been dropped on it. I could not draw a full breath. Instinctively, I tried to tighten my belly and push myself upright, only to feel an unfamiliar weight dragging at my waist and abdomen. My heart dropped. A waist-high bronze mirror stood beside the bed. I turned my head and found myself staring at a face I had never seen before. The cheeks were full and soft, but the skin held none of the healthy flush of a well person. It was pale, swollen, almost gray. Heavy shadows lay beneath the eyes. A bruise on the temple had already turned purple. The wrists were puffy, and a fine jade bangle had sunk so deeply into the flesh that it left a dark red groove. I stared into the mirror for a long while. The woman inside stared back with the same lifeless expression. Then a flood of strange memories burst into my mind like a grain sack split open from above. The Great Shang Dynasty, Prince Ning's residence, Shen Mingtang put together. Those three things gave me my new identity. I was the legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Dingbei, the lawful wife of Prince Ning Xiaoyanheng, and perhaps the finest joke the entire capital had enjoyed over tea for the last 3 years. The Shen Mingtang in those memories had a dreadful temper. She smashed things whenever she was angry, flew into a rage if anyone so much as hinted that she was fat, and yet could never resist rich food in 3 years of marriage. Every meeting between her and Prince Ning ended in chaos. Last night she had heard that Xiao Yanheng spoke a few extra words to her half-sister, Shen Wangqing, at a palace banquet. She returned home, overturned a tea table, then, out of spite, and on an empty stomach, drank an entire pot of some so-called slimming tea. When she stood, the room spun. She crashed headfirst into a rosewood screen and collapsed. As for me, in my last life, I had run a modest private kitchen. I worked from before dawn until deep into the night. The final thing I remembered was a pot of braised pork, just finishing on the stove. I had leaned against the white-tiled wall and thought, I'll close my eyes for 2 minutes. I never finished those 2 minutes. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. Apparently, heaven thought I had not spent enough of my last life over a stove, so in this life, it had kindly upgraded my kitchen to a princely estate. But there was a more urgent problem. I was so hungry I could have gnawed the leg off the bed. Is there anything to eat? I asked hoarsely. The maid, still beside the bed, froze. Food, I repeated, licking my dry, bitter lips. Hot porridge will do. A plain steamed bun will do. Anything as long as no one brings me another bowl of medicine. Her lips moved uncertainly, as if she were weighing whether she dared answer. At that moment, the heavy curtain over the doorway was swept aside. A man entered in a dark blue-green robe. He was broad-shouldered and straight-backed, with only a plain jade ornament at his waist. His features were sharp and severe. His dark eyes settled first on me, then moved to the water spilled across the floor. The memory supplied the answer at once. Prince Ning Xiaoyanheng. The former Shen Mingtang had cried over this man, raged over him, and cursed him into her pillow through more sleepless nights than I cared to count. He stopped exactly 3 paces from the bed, a remarkably precise distance, 1 step closer, apparently, and I might spring like a maddened lioness and tear out his throat. The imperial physician says you are weakened from poor health and suffered only a light blow to the head. Rest will be enough. His voice was cold enough to frost glass. The steward has listed everything you broke last night. The cost will be taken from your private allowance. As it should be, pay for all of it. The room fell into a strange silence. At last, a faint crack appeared in Xiao Yanheng's composure. I looked back at him openly. I truly was too hungry to quarrel, while he truly seemed determined to stand there forever. In the end, I broke the stalemate. Does your highness have any further instructions? One dark brow lifted. Last night you declared that you would rather starve than eat a single grain of rice from Prince Ning's household. Words spoken last night, I said, throwing back the silk quilt, expired at sunrise. I swung both feet over the side of the bed and planted them firmly on the footstool. I had badly overestimated this body. The next instant, my knees buckled and I pitched forward. Xiao Yanheng clearly had not expected me to fall quite so decisively. By instinct, he caught my arm with his forearm. I used him to steady myself. My nose nearly brushed his shoulder, close enough for me to catch the cool scent of pine on his clothes. At that distance, I finally understood one thing. The man's face truly was flawless. A wildly inappropriate thought flashed through my head. The former owner of this body may have had a rotten temper, but her taste in men was viciously good. Then I wanted to slap myself. Look at the state of you, and you still have time to admire a handsome face. I pulled my arm back at once. Thank you. Xiao Yanheng glanced at his suddenly empty hand. His gaze darkened. Where are you going? The kitchen. You have only just awakened, which is precisely why I am starving. I called the maid Qingdai to help me walk. The small kitchen was only 1 corridor away from my chambers. Halfway there, I regretted every decision that had brought me to that corridor. This body was in worse condition than I had imagined. My legs felt filled with lead. My chest tightened. My lower back ached. If I walked even a little faster, cold sweat soaked through my inner robe. In my former life, I could work 10 hours straight in a hot kitchen and toss a huge iron wok with one hand. Now a few dozen paces left me breathing as though I had climbed a mountain. Worse than the exhaustion was the deep, bone-level sense of unfamiliarity. The sleeves were too wide. The layered skirts shifted under my feet. My center of balance was nothing like the one I remembered. Going down a step, I nearly caught my own hem and tumbled forward. I barely recovered, then pretended nothing had happened. Beside me, Qingdai pressed her lips together. Her hands hovered uncertainly, ready to catch me, but afraid of offending me. I stopped to drag in 2 breaths. If you want to laugh, then laugh properly. Her face went white. This servant would never dare. Then hold it in, honestly. She did, with heroic terror, all the way to the kitchen. The moment I crossed the threshold, a thick sweetness, almost greasy in its richness, struck me full in the face. On the rosewood work table sat a glossy braised pork hock dripping with fat, pastries buried under heavy syrup, an entire plate of candied fruit, and a pot of pigeon soup shimmering with oil. The pork hock was beautifully cooked, fat and lean layered together, the sort of dish I would once have praised. The worst part was what happened when this body smelled it. My stomach clenched hard, not from disgust, from craving. I stood frozen. For the first time, I understood with brutal clarity that waking in another body was not simply a matter of putting on a different skin. This body carried its own habits, its own cravings, its own memories. It remembered syrupy sweetness, rich fat, and that brief false comfort that came from swallowing food far heavier than it needed. Madame Luo, who oversaw the kitchen, hurried over with a broad smile. Your Highness, you have finally agreed to eat. You went all last night without a bite. You must nourish yourself properly now. She eagerly lifted a tender piece of pork hock into a gold-rimmed dish. It was braised for 2 full hours. It melts the moment it touches the tongue. I took the chopsticks. Against all reason, I actually lifted the meat. Oil slid down the dark red skin. The rich scent of sauce and sugar curled straight into my nose. I had already brought it to my lips when my stomach suddenly seized. The bitter remnants of last night's wretched slimming brew surged up my throat. I jerked my head away. "Take it away," Madame Luo froze. Dish suspended in midair. "Your Highness, clear all of this. But these have always been your favorite dishes." I pressed a handkerchief to my mouth until the nausea settled, then looked up at her. "Not any more." "But your Highness is weak. If you eat only plain grains and vegetables, white rice, a few handfuls of greens, 2 eggs." I cut her off. "Can you bring me those?" She hesitated too long. A flare of pure irritation rose in me. Not measured anger, not careful judgment. I was simply tired, sick, ravenous, and desperate for one mouthful of clean food that would not make my stomach hurt, and even that required an argument. "Madame Luo." She flinched. "This servant is here." "I am hungry." I set the ivory chopsticks down sharply. The crack against the table rang through the room. "Are those 3 words plain enough?" At last she dared not say another word. She turned away to fetch the ingredients. The deep iron pot in the princely kitchen was far deeper than the woks I knew, and the stove sat at an unfamiliar height. When I crouched to judge the fire, pain stabbed through my knee so sharply that I nearly failed to stand. Qingde hurried to support me. "Your Highness, please let the cooks handle such rough work." "No need," I said at once. My pride survived perhaps half a minute. While chopping greens, one of my enormous sleeves dropped with perfect accuracy straight into a basin of cold water. Qingdai, meme, expressionless. I hauled the soaked sleeve out and wrung it dry. A quiet cough sounded behind me. I spun around. At some point, Xiao Yanhong had appeared in the doorway, arms folded across his chest. I stared at him. "If you want to laugh, laugh. Do not injure yourself holding it in." His face remained calm. This prince was not laughing. "Then why did you turn your face away?" At that he obediently turned back. There was unmistakable amusement still hiding in his eyes. That only annoyed me more. Me first pot of porridge in this new life failed magnificently. I misjudged the fire and burned a solid black crust onto the bottom. The rice smelled pleasant enough if one ignored the unmistakable scent of scorching. I stared into the ruined pot with complicated feelings. In my former life I had owned a proper kitchen of my own. Now my grand return to the stove had ended with me burning plain white porridge, splendid, truly splendid. Perhaps we should throw it away and start again. Qingde suggested carefully. I scooped up a little with a wooden spoon, blew on it, and tasted it. Number, it is still edible. The final bowl of vegetable and egg porridge looked tragic. The rice had cooked too soft, and beneath the mild flavor lingered a faint, smoky bitterness. But when the first warm spoonful slid into my stomach, every taut string inside me finally loosened. Gentle plain, my stomach did not protest. I ate slowly. By the time I reached half a bowl, my belly already felt full, yet my mouth began yearning for the syrupy cake I had seen earlier. That craving, rooted so deeply in the body's old instincts, left me with an embarrassing sense of defeat. I set down the spoon at once and drank 2 cups of warm water instead. Xiao Yanhang was still leaning by the doorway. "You can cook?" he asked suddenly. I wiped my mouth without looking up. "A little." "Why have I never seen you touch a stove before?" I did not wish to. It was an answer with no sincerity at all, and he knew it. Before he could press further, a guard hurried in from the front court. "Your Highness, someone has come from the palace." Chief Eunuch Gao, one of the emperor's most trusted attendants, had arrived in person with an oral command ordering us to enter the palace at once. I had barely forced down half a bowl of scorched porridge, and sweat still beaded on my forehead. My first response was refusal. "Can it not wait until tomorrow?" Chief Eunuch Gao gave a helpless smile. "I fear not. Your Highness. His Highness the Imperial grandson has refused food and water again today. His Majesty is beside himself." I looked down at my half-empty bowl. A terrible feeling rose in my heart. It seemed I truly was doomed to spend this life feeding people. By the time the carriage rattled into the palace, I regretted everything. Not entering the palace, eating only half a bowl of porridge out of ridiculous pride. This body could not hold much food. Yet it burned through what little I ate with alarming speed. By the time the carriage wheels rolled over the palace's stone road, my stomach already felt hollow enough to make my hands tremble. Qingde, seated beside me, quietly lifted one corner of the food box in her lap. "Your Highness, the warm pavilion is still some distance away. Would you like a few bites first?" Inside was a small portion of noodles tossed with scallion oil prepared in haste before we left. There were hardly any noodles and only the thinnest gloss of oil. I had brought them merely as a precaution. I lifted the carriage curtain and looked at the high palace walls. We will see what happens when we arrive. Of all the places in Shen Mingtang's memories, the palace was the one she dreaded most, not because of the rules, because everyone inside had a poisoned tongue. At a so-called family banquet, undercurrents ran thicker than half a month's gossip in the capital's market lanes. Some women watched to see whether her clothes made her look larger. Others counted how many pieces of meat she took. A few even listened when she sat down, waiting to hear whether the rosewood chair creaked beneath her weight. Those humiliations had not happened to me, but this body remembered them. Just before crossing the threshold of the warm pavilion, my hand moved on its own toward my sash. I tugged at the outer robe, trying to loosen it enough to hide my waist. The instant I realized what I was doing, I froze. Qingde had noticed too. I dropped my hand as though burned. The sash was crooked. Qingde, blessedly, was far too tactful to expose me. The warm pavilion was already filled with noble ladies, royal relatives, and members of the imperial household. The emperor sat at the head, his expression dark enough to promise thunder. Not far away sat a young man in a finely woven moon-white robe. His face was strikingly handsome, but years near the summit of power had given him a distant, restrained air. More than a dozen exquisite dishes covered the Huangwali table before him. He had not touched a single one. This was Xiao Jingheng, the emperor's eldest grandson. The crown prince had died young, and the emperor had raised his grandson at his own side. Everyone praised the young heir for his restraint, steadiness, and resemblance to his late father. At present, however, he looked less like the dignified heir to an empire, and more like a stalk of green bamboo someone had forced to soak in ginseng broth for 3 days. Still upright, still elegant, utterly exhausted by the very thought of food. "At least drink a few mouthfuls," the emperor urged, struggling to keep his temper. Xiao Jingheng's back remained straight. His lips stayed pressed together. An imperial chef, sweating profusely, stepped forward with a bowl. "Your Highness, this ginseng chicken broth was made only from the tenderest breast meat, with century-old ginseng. Remove it." Xiao Jingheng did not raise his voice. Yet the command was absolute. The chef's face collapsed. Another attendant hurried forward with a bowl of crystal-clear bird's nest soup. This time, Xiao Jingheng did not even lift his eyes. Watching from the side, I felt my scalp tighten. A dozen people were gathered around a grown man, coaxing him to eat as though he were some sacred ancestor. If he refused one dish, they begged. If he refused again, they fetched something rarer. At this rate, the dining table was beginning to feel more like a place of judgment. I was still thinking this when a soft, contemptuous laugh came from beside me. "Princess Consort Ning has come today as well." The voice was neither loud nor quiet, just perfectly pitched for half the pavilion to hear. Madame Yan, wife of the Duke of Engwo, held a gold-embroidered handkerchief over her lips while her eyes slid toward me. Perhaps that is for the best. If His Highness the Imperial grandson still has no appetite, at least there will be someone here to finish this entire table. Such delicacies need not go to waste. Several noblewomen nearby lowered their heads in shared understanding, shoulders trembling. Of course I understood the barb. The old shame buried in this body stabbed through my chest before I could stop it. That swift, instinctive response irritated me more than Madame Yan herself. I did not care what these painted peacocks thought of me, yet this body, worn down by years of ridicule, still wanted to shrink into the shadows. I drew a slow breath and did not answer immediately. Then I noticed half a chestnut cake still pinched between Madame Yan's fingers. She must have swallowed too quickly in her eagerness to mock me. I had meant to let it pass. My temper disagreed. "Madam, do eat slowly," I said with grave concern. She blinked. "What?" "Chestnut cake is dry. It catches in the throat." I met her eyes word by word. "If you choke before His Majesty, then today's table truly will have one fewer mouth to feed." Somewhere in the quiet corner of the pavilion someone snorted with laughter. I followed the sound. Xiao Yanheng sat perfectly straight, staring out the window, shoulders utterly still. I would have wagered 10 years of kitchen work that the laugh had come from him. The emperor had no interest in the quarrels of noblewomen. When he finally noticed me, his brows drew together sharply. "Why are you here?" I stared at him. "Was it not your Majesty who summoned us?" The emperor froze too. Chief Eunuch Gao immediately bent at the waist. "Your Majesty, this servant carried your oral command and on the way invited Her Highness from Prince Ning's residence as well." The emperor fell silent for 2 full breaths, then waved a tired hand. "Very well, sit." I had barely settled into a lower seat when I felt someone staring at me. Xiao Jingheng, more precisely. He was staring with almost painful concentration in my direction. My back prickled. I touched the corner of my mouth. No vegetable leaf. He was still staring. Then I followed his gaze and understood. He was looking at the plain wooden food box in Qingde's hands, scallion oil noodles, because they had been tossed in haste. The smell of toasted scallion and sauce still clung to the seams of the box. At last, Xiao Jingheng broke his silence. "Aunt." The entire room seemed startled by that one word. "What is in that box?" I looked at the box, then at the emperor high above us. The old sovereign had already straightened in his seat. His eyes were shining even more brightly than Xiao Jingheng's Qingdai carefully lifted the lid. The warm, forceful smell of scallion oil and toasted soy burst into a room thick with expensive incense. After the journey, the noodles had clumped together. The once green scallions had dulled, set beside palace dishes arranged like carved jewels in gold and jade vessels. The bowl looked like a poor country cousin who had wandered into a noble feast by mistake. Madame Yan frowned and covered her nose. "Such coarse fare! How dare you bring it into the palace?" Before I could answer, Xiao Jingheng spoke first. "We wish to taste it." The emperor slapped the table almost by reflex. "Take it to him." I remained exactly where I was. The emperor glared at me. "Why are you not moving?" "Imperial father, the noodles are completely cold. They have clumped together." "Cold is no matter." Imperial father. Xiao Yanheng, silent until now, interrupted calmly. "Cold food will trouble the stomach. Better to let her prepare a fresh bowl in the imperial kitchen." I whipped my head around and glared at him. He lifted his teacup without the slightest change in expression. The emperor approved at once. Thus I was escorted to the imperial kitchen by a crowd of people as though I were a prisoner under guard. Even more absurdly, every chef on duty put down his work and gathered 3 rows deep to watch. "What stock does your highness require?" "Shall we soak the finest bird's nest?" "Deer tendon from the Southern Tribute." "Jinhua ham brought in this morning." Their voices hammered at my skull. I took a breath. Half a gin of flour, 2 eggs. A handful of scallions. 1 fresh chicken breast. Nothing else. The chief chef gaped. Nothing else, nothing else. They looked at me as though I had announced my intention to build the imperial palace out of 4 pieces of straw. Ignored them and rolled up my sleeves. The real trouble was the palace stove. Its fire was fierce and unfamiliar. On my first attempt, the water boiled too violently. The noodles had barely gone in before the rolling water battered them apart. I tried to lower the flame, but the nervous attendant tending the fire threw on another piece of dry wood instead. The pot erupted like a fountain. The noodles stuck together in a miserable mass. I stared at the wreckage on the bottom of the pot while a vein throbbed at my temple. Behind me stood more than a dozen of the finest cooks in the empire. Excellent, my second meal in this new life, and I had come to the imperial palace to disgrace myself. Throw it out, wash the pot. We begin again, I said with all the dignity I could gather. The chief chef hurried forward. Perhaps this servant should boil the noodles for your highness. Number, I will do it. This time I managed the fire myself. I washed my hands, stripped the chicken from the bone, and simmered the bones into a clear broth, patiently skimming away every trace of foam. I minced the chicken breast fine and worked in only a little egg white. Into a cool pan went a small amount of oil, then the white parts of the scallions over a low flame until their fragrance deepened. Only at the end did I add the green tops. The noodles were cooked until tender but still firm, rinsed once in warm water to remove excess starch, then covered with clear chicken broth, no heavy grease, no elaborate spices. The whole bowl was clean and simple, carrying only the honest savor of chicken and the toasted fragrance of scallion oil. When I lifted it, the homely smell of a real kitchen made even me swallow. Back in the warm pavilion, Xiao Jingheng actually picked up his chopsticks. The first bite was slow, cautious. The second came more easily. By the third, the emperor, who had been watching with desperate intensity, could no longer help himself and leaned forward. Xiao Jingheng's chopsticks stopped at once. Without thinking, I raised my hand directly in front of the emperor's line of sight. Imperial father. He froze. Sit back. My tone was firmer than wisdom recommended. We were only looking. No one can eat while being stared at like that. He is not a prisoner awaiting sentence. The pavilion became so silent I could have heard a needle strike the floor. Only then did I realize I had just scolded the son of heaven. Cold sweat broke across my back. Xiao Yanheng looked at me, his expression unreadable. I decided there was no retreat left. I might as well stand my ground and pretend death had already claimed me. To my astonishment, the emperor coughed once and actually sat back. Chief Eunuch Gao, displaying the survival instincts of a man who had lived long in the palace, quietly took one step backward and made himself smaller. Xiao Jingheng lowered his head and continued eating. After nearly half a bowl, he put down his chopsticks. The emperor immediately became anxious. Gao, bring the imperial grandson another serving. I snatched the bowl away first. The emperor stared at me. He cannot eat more, I said, guarding the bowl. He has not even finished half. He ate this half because he chose to. No one coaxed or forced it into him. I met the emperor's gaze despite the pressure. Yesterday he could barely swallow 3 mouthfuls of broth. Today he ate half a bowl of noodles. Is that not already a great step? The emperor had no answer. My palms were drenched with sweat. Then Xiao Jingheng looked up. Aunt, tomorrow, will there be more? The emperor answered before I could. There will. I stared at him. He agreed quickly enough. Who exactly was supposed to cook it? The corner of Xiao Jingheng's mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. For the first time, looking at this young man, everyone called precocious, calculating, and impossible to approach. I thought perhaps he was not truly so distant. Perhaps he had simply been hungry for too long inside a gilded cage. The next day, under the noble excuse of rest and recovery, Xiao Jingheng moved openly into Prince Ning's residence. The first thing he did after settling in the western courtyard was send someone to ask where the kitchen was. Qingde returned with a report while I was wrestling with a lump of dough at the work table. Your Highness, the imperial grandson sent someone to ask how to reach the small kitchen. My hands were white with flour. I did not look up. Did you tell him? Yes. Then why did you come back? Qingde struggled not to smile. His Highness's guard said he was merely asking in passing. Before she finished speaking, a tall figure blocked the light at the doorway. Xiao Jingheng wore a plain bamboo green robe, hands folded behind his back, his expression composed beyond reproach. I looked at him. He looked at me. I lowered my head and continued kneading. For a question asked, in passing, Your Highness's feet were remarkably accurate. They wandered straight into my kitchen. His face did not change. We meant to discuss affairs with imperial uncle. We took a wrong turn. Prince Ning's study is in the eastern courtyard. Half the estate lies between here and there. A very wrong turn. I had to admire the royal family's inherited talent for lying without blinking. I lifted my chin toward the basin. Wash your hands. He went at once, as naturally as though this truly were his own kitchen. That noon, I made small wontons. Fresh shepherd's purse was chopped fine and mixed with minced pork, 3 parts fat to 7 parts lean. The wrappers were rolled thin as cicada wings. Xiao Jingheng sat on a small stool watching for a long while, then reached out with his elegant fingers and picked up a wrapper. I thought the pampered imperial grandson wished to learn a little honest kitchen work. Instead, he dropped an enormous lump of filling into the center and squeezed with heroic force. Pop! The wrapper burst without the slightest resistance. A lump of filling slapped onto the board. He fell silent. I fell silent. Qingdai, with her back to us, was shaking so hard her shoulders looked ready to come loose. Xiao Jingheng drew a breath, scooped the ruined wrapper and filling together, and rolled the entire disaster into a ball. Can this still be cooked? Yes, truly. It will look like a meatball wrapped in a torn blanket. The flavor will survive. At last he lost the battle and laughed quietly. It was not loud, but some of the gloom that usually clung to him loosened. At that moment, Xiao Yanheng strode into the courtyard. He stopped hard at the kitchen threshold. His gaze landed first on Xiao Jingheng's unusually smiling face, then moved slowly to me, hands covered in flour. What are you doing? Making wontons, I answered with perfect confidence. This prince is not blind, I can see that. Then why ask? The words left my mouth before I remembered that a cautious princess consort probably should not speak to her husband, like a market sparring partner. Oddly, Xiao Yanheng did not become angry. He seemed almost accustomed to it. His eyes rested for a moment on the neat row of wontons. A wicked impulse rose in me. Can your highness make them? A gentleman keeps his distance from the kitchen. Number would you like to learn? Not in the least. Then kindly move aside. You are blocking my light. Beside me, Xiao Jingheng lowered his head, shoulders shaking violently. A vein jumped at Xiao Yanheng's temple. Half a quarter hour later, Prince Ning, who had expressed not the least interest, had silently rolled up his costly silk sleeves and stood at the work table like an executioner awaiting orders. I pushed the bowl of dough toward him. Knead. He pressed down with both hands. I frowned at once. Gently, it is dough, not your enemy's throat. He tried again. Number push with the heel of your palm. Draw it back, turn it, then push again. He listened with grave concentration, lips pressed tight, brows drawn together, more serious than a commander reviewing border dispatches. Somehow, he managed to knead a soft lump of dough with the murderous solemnity of a public execution. I endured it as long as I could. Your Highness. It is innocent flour. This prince is aware. Then stop looking at it as though you intend to interrogate it before dawn. Xiao Jingheng burst out laughing. This time he truly could not stop. Every cook and maid in the kitchen froze at the sound. Even Xiao Yanheng's hands went still in the dough. Something in me softened, though I kept my face straight. I tapped the rolling pin against the board in front of Xiao Jingheng. If you are done laughing, keep working. You are the one eating torn blanket meatballs tonight. Aunt, he looked up, eyes bright. What? You have flour on your cheek. I wiped one side of my face. His smile widened as he pointed to the other. Xiao Yanheng spoke quietly. The other side, I wiped again and still missed it. The next instant, Xiao Yanheng reached out. The pad of his finger, roughened by a faint callus, brushed gently beside my nose. I turned to stone. So did he for the briefest moment. He was too close. I could smell cold pine on his sleeve, mixed absurdly with flour. Me heart gave one hard, traitorous beat. I stepped back at once and threw a random handful of flour across the work table. The dough is ready. Time to cook. Xiao Yanheng withdrew his hand as though nothing had happened. Xiao Jingheng lowered his head and continued shaping the grotesque wonton in his hands, but his grin nearly reached his ears. For one dangerous moment, I wanted to pour the boiling water over both uncle and nephew. The days began to pass in that ridiculous, strangely harmonious fashion. Xiao Jingheng came to the kitchen every day to pass by. Xiao Yanheng was occasionally seized as unpaid labor and ordered to tend the fire. As for me, I forced myself to walk in the courtyard each day, little by little, as though teaching this body how to live again. The first day, I barely reached the corner of the corridor before my legs shook. The second, I forced myself another dozen paces. On the third, pride got the better of me, and I walked an entire circuit of the rear courtyard. That night, my knees punished me mercilessly. I sat alone on the edge of the bed, skirt lifted enough to massage the aching joints. Steady footsteps sounded outside. Thinking it was Qingde bringing hot water, I said, "Leave it on the table, go rest." No answer. I looked up and met Xiao Yanheng's dark eyes. At once, I yanked my skirt down in flustered embarrassment. "Your Highness, what brings you here so late?" He stopped a few paces away. Jingheng said, "You scarcely ate at supper." "Since when does the imperial grandson concern himself with how much a woman eats? Your knees hurt?" His gaze dropped to them. Then he looked at my fingertips, reddened from pressing so hard into the sore joint. I fell silent. So much for that lie. I walked a little too far today, I admitted, looking away. If it hurt, why say nothing? I was already exhausted. Something about the faint reproach in his tone lit a useless spark of anger in me. "If I told you, could your Highness hurt in my place?" I regretted it the instant I said it. Too sharp, too bitter, yet Xiao Yanheng did not become angry. He was silent for a moment, then said only, "Do not walk so far tomorrow." He turned and left. Watching his back, I muttered under my breath, "I know that without you telling me." The next morning, I noticed that the uneven pebble path between my chambers and the small kitchen had vanished overnight. In its place lay a broad, flat road of blue stone. Qingde said the steward had brought men in during the night to finish it. At first, I thought little of it. A few days later, the steward came with the household accounts, and I remarked casually, "That new path is well laid, much smoother." He looked startled by the praise. "Does your Highness mean the blue stone road His Highness personally ordered replaced? The prince said the old pebbles were too slippery and too easy to twist an ankle on." My cinnabar brush stopped over the ledger. A blot of red spread across the page. I said, lowering my eyes. That night, Xiao Yanheng came to the western courtyard for supper as usual. For once, I kept glancing at him. At last, he set down his chopsticks. "Do you have something to say?" "Number? Then why do you keep staring at this prince?" I did not blink. "Your appetite is good today. You seem to be eating more, Xiao Yanheng." I lowered my head and concentrated on my rice, while a strange, awkward warmth stirred inside me. It was not gratitude, at least. I refused to call it that. The true test of our household came the first time the emperor arrived without warning. No messenger came ahead of him. When he stepped into the little courtyard, Xiao Jingheng had just stolen a freshly fried radish and pork ball from beside the oil pot with his chopsticks, crisp outside and tender within. It was also hot enough to twist his handsome face beyond recognition. I turned and found the precious imperial grandson holding the meatball half in his mouth, unable to swallow it and unwilling to spit it out, eyes watering from the heat. "Spit it out. You will burn your tongue." He tried to endure with dignity. "And no matter, your tongue is nearly cooked through and you say, 'No matter.'" I grabbed a rough porcelain bowl and thrust it at him. At that exact moment, Xiao Yanheng let out an unusually low chuckle. Then a figure in imperial yellow stepped through the gate. The courtyard froze. Xiao Jingheng stood like a carved statue, meatball still half visible in his mouth. I held up a chipped bowl in a decidedly unprincess-like pose, and Prince Ning, commander of great armies, had his silk sleeves rolled high and both hands covered in muddy water. As he crouched beside a basin washing a bundle of greens, the emperor's grave gaze moved across the three of us for what felt like half an incense stick. At last he forced out 4 words with heartfelt dismay. What disgraceful disorder! Half an hour later, the same Son of Heaven who had condemned our disgraceful disorder sat at the little stone table outside the kitchen, finishing his second bowl of radish and meatball soup with obvious satisfaction. Chief Eunuch Gao ventured carefully, "Your Majesty, did you not say this common soup was rather plain?" The Emperor set down his empty bowl with a perfectly straight face. "We require another bowl before we can judge precisely where the plainness lies." As Chief Eunuch Gao filled a third bowl, Xiao Jingheng lowered his head and devoted himself to his meal, while Xiao Yanheng calmly pretended the scenery elsewhere was very interesting. I bit the tip of my chopstick and looked at these men who stood at the summit of power, now crowded into one small courtyard fighting over food. For the first time, I thought perhaps this absurd new life was not quite as unbearable as I had imagined. Trouble found me soon enough. The afternoon Shen Wenqing came to visit. I was frying lotus root sandwiches stuffed with meat. The fire simply refused to behave. The first batch cooked too dark. The second came out pale and soft instead of crisp. I stared at the two miserable extremes on the plate and felt my temper fraying. Qingde tried weakly to rescue the situation. "This servant thinks they both smell wonderful." I glared at her. "Try saying they do not." Her mouth snapped shut. That was precisely when Shen Wenqing stepped into the kitchen. She wore a pale green dress, simple and elegant, and carried 2 exquisite food boxes. The first thing her eyes fixed on was the red mark on the back of my hand where hot oil had splashed me. "Elder sister, you are a princess consort. Why must you do everything with your own hands?" She hurried toward me, her eyes reddened at once, tears gathering as neatly as pearls. "There are so many servants in this household. Why put yourself through such hardship?" Every word sounded tender. In the memories I had inherited, this half-sister had always been just so gentle, just so considerate. When noble ladies mocked Shen Mingtang's figure at banquets, it was Shen Wenqing who braved the whispers and left early with her. When Shen Mingtang fell seriously ill, Shen Wenqing sat at her bedside half the night until her eyes turned red from exhaustion. That was why, after arriving in this body, I had never been able simply to stamp the words "wicked rival" across her forehead. Some people do not carry their cruelty on their faces. A soft blade wrapped in sugar is far harder to guard against. I ran the back of my hand beneath cool water. It is nothing a few drops of oil. Shen Wenqing set down the food boxes and opened them layer by layer. I remembered that elder sister used to love the osmanthus cakes from Fengtai House, so I went out of my way to buy 2 boxes today. The moment the lid opened, that familiar cloying sweetness filled the kitchen. The body's old memories woke at once. That stubborn craving rose again. I picked up a small piece and put it in my mouth. Too sweet. The oil was not even particularly fresh and, yet my tongue and brain, damn them, insisted that the taste was safe, familiar. I chewed slowly without expression. Shen Wenqing watched me with a gentle smile. "Elder sister does look healthier these days. Only." She paused at exactly the right moment. "Only what?" "Some ladies outside have loose tongues. They say that a prince's lawful wife spends all day smelling of smoke and oil running in and out of kitchens like a common cook. They say it lacks the dignity of the imperial family." Her expression turned wounded on my behalf. It pains me to hear them speak so. My fingers paused around the cake. That old discomfort surged again. Not anger of the mind. A reflex of the body, my stomach sank. My chest tightened. This was how the old Shen Mingtang had reacted whenever rumors reached her. "Which ladies?" I demanded before I could stop myself. The moment the question left my mouth, I regretted it. A flicker of satisfaction flashed through Shen Wenqing's eyes before she lowered her lashes. "I only happened to overhear a few ladies I know. Elder sister should not trouble herself over idle talk." I looked at her quietly. The former Shen Mingtang would already have seized on those words like a drowning woman clutching a reed. "Which ladies? What exactly did they say? Did the prince hear them?" She would have questioned and questioned until shame turned inward, then exploded outward. I dropped the rest of the cake back onto the plate and brushed the crumbs from my fingers. Forget it. All the consoling phrases Shen Ching had prepared stopped in her throat. She looked up, startled. Elder sister, you will not ask. Their mouths belong to them. What am I to do? Visit every household with needle and thread and sew them shut. I took a sip of tea to wash away the sweetness. Let them talk. Her smile tightened. Almost at once she dragged the conversation toward Xiao Yanheng. I have heard that His Highness often dines in elder sister's courtyard now. Sometimes he comes for a simple meal. That is wonderful. She lowered her gaze, her tone soft with something almost mournful. After enduring 3 bitter years, elder sister has finally won through and captured His Highness's heart. For some reason, the words finally won through turned my stomach, as though a woman's entire worth, all her grief and joy, could be measured by whether a man chose to eat supper in her room. I lowered my eyes to my tea and gave her nothing. Shen Ching sat a little longer, then left when she found no opening. After she was gone, I opened the osmanthus cakes again. Qingdai asked carefully, "Does your Highness still wish to eat more?" "I do." I stared at the delicate cakes, irritated by the craving itself. "So put them away before I touch them again." Then I lifted the embossed paper label from the bottom of the box. Fengtai House again. In the vast scattered memories left by the former Shen Mingtang, the pattern suddenly sharpened. Her dress fabrics came from Fengtai House. Her favorite sweets came from Fengtai House. Even the slimming tea Madame Luo pressed on her every day had been prepared by an apothecary closely tied to Fengtai House. A tiny seed of suspicion broke through the soil of my mind. At first, I thought I was imagining plots where none existed, so I said nothing. I only sent Qingdai quietly to the storehouse to bring me 6 months of kitchen ledgers from my courtyard. The first reading showed nothing but absurdly high spending. On the second, I took a brush and made separate lists for rice, flour, oil, sugar, dried goods, preserved fruits, and the other staples used by the estate. By the third check, I thought my eyes had failed me. The recorded monthly use of white sugar was greater by an entire digit than what a household of this size should have used in a year. Xiao Yanheng entered the study while I sat staring at the impossible figure on the page. 8,000 jin of sugar. He stood behind me, eyes moving over the sheet. A chill entered his voice. My face warmed. I know the number is wrong, and I may have carried the wrong place on the abacus. He did not mock me for once. I almost wished he would. I settled myself and calculated everything again. The final amount was not 8,000 jin, but it was still several times what the rear household of a princely estate should have consumed. Worse were the prices. The next day, I sent Qingdai in plain clothes to ask prices quietly at several large merchants in the eastern market. The list she brought back confirmed my suspicion. For sugar of the same quality, Fengtai House had charged Prince Ning's residents 40% more than the market price lard. Bird's nest, fine charcoal, the same trick every time. I held the thin sheet of prices between my fingers and felt them slowly turn cold. Who truly owns Fengtai House? Xiao Yanheng asked. Watching my face, I closed my eyes. The Lu family, my stepmother's kin. The study went dead silent. I had imagined that uncovering the culprit would feel glorious. Instead, faced with the proof, my chest felt packed with wet wool. I was furious enough to shake, because the woman everyone mocked as the fat princess consort had trusted these people with her whole heart. She believed Madame Luo urged rich, sugary food on her because the old woman pitied her unhappiness. She believed Shen Ching carried every cruel rumor back to her because her sister feared she would be deceived. She believed her stepmother, Madame Liu, had taken charge of the shops left by her birth mother because she wished to spare Shen Mingtang the burden after marriage. So that was what true malice looked like. Not a blade swung openly at your face. A slow poison thickly coated in sugar, fed to you one smiling mouthful at a time. Xiao Yanheng watched me for a long while. Will you keep investigating? I rubbed my aching brow hard. Yes, his gaze sharpened. Then we uncover all of it. The next morning, the chief steward of the estate arrived respectfully at my desk, carrying old account books stacked nearly to his chest. I had assumed Xiao Yanheng merely objected to money being drained from the household treasury. Then I opened the ledgers and discovered that he had ordered the accountants to separate line by line every record connected to the dowry properties my birth mother had left me. A single sheet of paper lay on top. His handwriting was strong and spare. These are your private holdings. Not one coin belongs to Prince Ning's household accounts. I stared at that line until my vision blurred slightly. Qingde leaned in from the side. Your Highness? What? Why are you smiling? I flattened my mouth at once. You saw wrong. I was not smiling. Of course. She stretched the words with the expression of someone who understood everything. I slapped the thick ledger onto the table to hide my fluster. Ina. Nonsense, brew me strong tea. We are staying up tonight. For the next 6 days, I buried myself under mountains of accounts. Investigating ledgers was not the swift triumph sung of in storybooks. Most of it was dull, exhausting work. Numbers, months, purchase receipts, delivery records, forged signatures. By the third night, my eyes had gone unfocused, and my thoughts felt like porridge. I stared at a shortage of 863 taels and somehow read it as 8,630. I was lifting my brush to circle this enormous sum when Xiao Yanheng reached over and took the abacus from my hand. Go to sleep. His tone allowed no argument. Number only 2 ledgers remain. I must finish them tonight. Tomorrow. What if word gets out and Feng Tai House alters the accounts before then? The estate accounting room is sealed under guard. Not a fly leaves it. But a thunderous yawn swallowed the rest of my protest and destroyed half my dignity. Xiao Yanheng looked down at me. Still determined to pretend you are not exhausted. I wisely closed my mouth. He turned, poured away the cold, strong tea beside me, and replaced it with a warm, calming broth. Then he picked up the plate of plum cakes I had been using to stay awake, and moved it half an arm's length farther from me. Me eyes followed the plate with unwavering devotion. Why are you taking that away? You have already eaten too heavy food late at night will trouble your stomach. My temper sparked at once. I made those cakes myself. Do you think I do not know my own limits? Then why are you still staring at them? Am I forbidden even to admire them with my eyes? He studied me for several breaths, then nodded. Very well. And he actually brought the plate back and set it beside my hand again. I had no answer. Sometimes speaking to this painfully literal man was more exhausting than reading ledgers. Fortunately, by the 7th day we had finally traced the entire chain. Feng Tai House had used family ties to supply Prince Ning's residence at inflated prices for years, bleeding enormous profits from the estate. Mi Courtyard had been their richest vein because the old Shen Mingtang's desperate overeating made her expenses easy to disguise. Meanwhile, 2 shops in excellent locations, both left to me by my birth mother, had somehow shown no profit at all under Madame Liu's management for 3 years. Some months they even recorded losses. During those same 3 years, 2 fertile estates outside the capital had mysteriously appeared under the Liu family's name. No one needed to ask where the money had gone. I closed the final ledger before I could offer any grand declaration about justice prevailing. My stomach betrayed me with a long, magnificent growl. In the silent study, it sounded like Thunder Xiao Yanheng paused halfway through a sip of tea and looked at me. I stared back without expression. Your Highness, examining accounts is hard labor. A person must be fed. Late that night, I went to the kitchen myself, simmered chicken broth, and made a large pot of smooth noodles with shredded chicken. Xiao Jingheng, apparently blessed with the nose of a hunting hound, happened to pass by the small kitchen once again. And so 3 people of exceedingly noble rank sat around a greasy, scarred wooden table in the kitchen, slurping hot noodles. No one mentioned the filthy ledgers stacked in the study. No one discussed revenge. But as I drew noodles through the steam, my nose suddenly stung. In my last life, whenever disaster came, I had learned to shoulder it alone. Now, for the first time, it seemed there were people standing behind me, willing to help clear the wreckage. That unfamiliar sense of safety frightened me, and I wanted it far more than I should have. 10 days before the emperor's birthday banquet, an imperial edict arrived at Prince Ning's residence. His Majesty personally appointed Princess Consort Ning to oversee several homely dishes gentle on the stomach for the birthday feast. Xiao Jingheng's first suggestion after hearing the edict was immediate. Shepherd's purse dumplings with pork are essential. When the emperor heard of this, his reply came back just as swiftly. Do not listen to that brat about everything, but the radish and meatball soup must remain. When Chief Eunuch Gao delivered those words, I stared at his face, which was creased almost beyond dignity from suppressed laughter. Those were truly His Majesty's words. His shoulders shook. Your Highness, this servant stakes his head upon it. Not one word has been changed. So I began planning the banquet menu with reluctant determination. Beggar's chicken wrapped in lotus leaves, light braised tofu lion's head meatballs, steamed perch, blanched seasonal greens, rice braised with cured meat. And the radish and beef soup the emperor had been longing for. No ginseng forests, no mountains of birds' nest, no mythical delicacies with names so grand no one dared put chopsticks into them. When Madame Yan encountered me in the palace reviewing the menu, she laughed openly. For His Majesty's 50th birthday feast, Princess Consort Ning truly intends to serve country vegetables and radishes. Is that not rather shabby? I was calculating quantities and did not lift my eyes. What has the radish done to offend you, madam? Such crude fare has no place at an imperial banquet. At last, I looked up and gave her the professional smile of a woman who had served difficult diners for years. If madam believes a radish lacks sufficient rank, perhaps I should beg His Majesty to grant it a noble title before I put it on the table. Her face darkened at once. Beside us, Xiao Jingheng choked on his tea and turned away, coughing violently. I cleared my throat with sudden innocence. I had clearly spent too much time with that uncle and nephew. My tongue was becoming harder to govern by the day. The true disaster came one day before the feast. The Imperial Household Office delivered the final batch of crucial ingredients to the palace kitchen. The moment I opened the wooden crate of fresh mushrooms, I caught the faintest trace of dull, stale dampness. Anyone without years in a kitchen would have missed it. In a dish heavy with oil and sauce, the smell could easily have been buried. I reached deep into the bottom of the crate and pulled out several mushrooms. Damp spoiling, my heart sank. I turned at once to the earthen jars of prepared sauce. The sealing wax was wrong. I had ordered green wax specifically. These jars were smeared with cheap red wax. The eunuch overseeing the imperial kitchen went white. Your Highness, what are we to do? My own heart began pounding. This was not my small kitchen from another life. This was the emperor's birthday banquet. Princes, ministers, and envoys would all be present. The menu had been approved and fixed half a month ago. If the food failed now, no one would care to hear excuses about merchants or spoiled deliveries. The person in charge would bear the blame, sweat gathered in my palms. And, as though summoned by ill fortune itself, Madame Yan appeared at precisely that moment. She looked at the sealed crates and covered her smile with a silk handkerchief. How unfortunate, I hear there is trouble with the ingredients. Still, Princess Consort Ning has never managed a grand imperial feast before. A little panic is understandable. I had no time for her barbs. Me eyes moved over what remained usable while my mind raced fresh chicken, live fish tofu radish, greens 2 baskets of lotus leaves, picked that very morning. The 2 main dishes that depended most heavily on mushrooms, and the prepared sauce had to be abandoned at once, but replaced with what me thoughts ran fast. Under the crushing pressure, my hand betrayed me and shook. A blue and white porcelain bowl slipped from my fingers and shattered across the golden floor tiles. Every chef and attendant around me dropped to their knees, hardly daring to breathe. Madame Yan's smile deepened. For one terrible instant, helplessness nearly drowned me. In my former life, if I ruined a banquet, I could apologize, repay the guests, even close the doors if matters went badly enough. Here, ruining an imperial feast could drag an entire household into disaster. For the first time, I wanted to run, then Xiao Yanhang strode through the doorway. He did not ask what had happened. He did not ask whether I could still manage. He went straight to the work table, swept a sharp gaze over the remaining ingredients, then turned to me. "What is missing?" I looked up at his stern face. My voice shook despite me. "Fresh mushrooms. There is no time to gather enough from the markets now." "Then do without them." His answer came without hesitation. "The prepared sauce was exchanged as well. We cannot use it. Discard it." But the menu was already submitted. "If there is fault, this prince bears it. Change the dishes." He did not raise his voice. There was almost no emotion in the words, "Ayet." They drove into my racing heart like an anchor dropped into storm water. My hands stopped shaking. He had not produced new ingredients. He had solved none of the practical problems. But one person stood beside me and said, "Change it. If the roof falls, I will hold it up." That was enough. I drew one deep breath, rolled my wide sleeves high, and bound them tightly out of the way. "The lotus leaf chicken stays, but make it clean and light. Salt and lotus leaf only for the flavor. Cancel the mushroom and cured meat rice. Replace it with simple vegetable rice and diced pork. Steam the live fish directly. Watch the heat. Not one moment too long or too short. The tofu lion's head meatballs remain unchanged." I paused at the last item. "Radish and beef soup, set up another stove. I want 3 enormous pots." The chef recording my orders looked up, hand trembling. Three pots, Your Highness. This is an imperial feast. Who could drink so much soup?" I remembered the emperor emptying 3 bowls in one sitting. "Make it," I said through my teeth. "Better too much than too little." When the birthday feast began, I did not dare take my seat. I hid behind a screen in a side hall like a prisoner awaiting judgment and listened as each dish was announced. The first drew little reaction, but nothing went wrong. The second earned praise from the ministers. Then came the lotus leaf chicken, altered beyond recognition from the approved version, and my palms went wet again. Not long after, Chief Eunuch Gao hurried into the side hall. My heart leapt into my throat. "Has His Majesty found fault?" Chief Eunuch Gao was smiling so broadly I could see every tooth. "Your Highness, His Majesty sent this old servant to ask whether there is more." "More of what?" "The lotus leaf chicken." "The radish soup." I stared at him. "Did they not just serve an entire basin?" His Majesty and several elder princes fought over it. "The bowl is already empty." A long breath escaped me. Then I laughed. "There is more. 2 full pots are still warming in the back." "Excellent. Save them. His Majesty says he wants them for the late night vigil as well." Later, I heard that Madame Yan still could not resist adding sourly at the table. In the end, it is only common radish fit for ordinary households. The emperor set down his jade bowl and looked at her coldly. "And what is wrong with common radish? We like its clean, honest flavor. If Madame finds the soup beneath her, shall we drink her bowl as well?" The Duke of Engwo dropped to his knees at once. Madame Yan finally learned the value of silence. Even more satisfying was what happened after the banquet. The spoiled ingredients were investigated from end to end. The delivery records had indeed been altered. The imperial kitchen had ordered the finest fresh goods. What arrived instead had sat in Fengtai House's stores long enough to spoil. Madame Liu and her people had not even meant to strike at the emperor's banquet. They were simply greedy and reckless beyond belief. For 3 years, they had played the same trick in Prince Ning's rear household, replacing good goods with inferior stock and pocketing the difference. Nothing had happened after all. The customer was only an unfavored mocked princess consort. If the goods were a little worse, who would bother to investigate? This time, however, their hand reached into the emperor's own kitchen. When the emperor finished reading the investigation in his study, his face turned dark enough to grind ink upon. 3 teacups did not survive his temper. Madame Liu was taken away for questioning that very night. The Marquis of Dingbei's household did not dare utter a word. The next day, Shen Wangqing arrived at Prince Ning's residence in tears. She stood beneath the eaves, eyes swollen, still managing to look heartbreakingly delicate. Elder sister mother may have done wrong. She may have withheld part of your dowry, but she only wished to preserve the dignity of the Marquis household. How could you join with outsiders and drive matters to such an extreme? I had worked through the entire night of the banquet. Both arms ached so badly I could hardly lift them. I did not even have enough strength left for a proper quarrel. Leaning against the doorframe, I watched her performance coldly. This Marquis household you keep speaking of, was there ever a place in it for Shen Mingtang? She faltered. Of course you will always be the legitimate daughter of the house. Then why was my mother's dowry used to fill the bottomless pit belonging to you and your mother? Her face went white. Her lips trembled. I had almost been curious to hear what fresh excuse she might invent. Instead, after a long silence, she looked at me with naked resentment and asked softly, Elder sister has His Highness protecting her now. His Majesty values you. You are about to open your own eating house. Everything has turned in your favor, since your life is so good now. Why can you not be generous? Why dig up all those old matters and push everyone toward ruin? I looked at her quietly. At last, I understood her completely. Because my life was better now. She believed every humiliation the old Shen Mingtang had endured could be erased by one demand for generosity. The money bled from her. The years she spent as the capital's favorite joke. The despair that had eaten her hollow. Apparently all of it should vanish because I was doing well. Now I became tired all at once. Even anger felt like wasted effort. Wang Qing, I said softly. The life I have now was carved out with my own hands. That does not erase what all of you did before. She bit her lower lip as tears spilled free. His Highness despised you in the first place, if you had not held the status of legitimate daughter. Yes, I know he despised me before. I cut her off. Her head came up sharply. She thought she had struck a wound. Instead, I smiled with sudden relief. Look at that. After all this talking, we have finally found one thing on which we agree. Outside the door, the courtyard went strangely silent. I turned. Xiao Yanheng stood at the gate, judging from his face. He had heard every word. I rubbed my nose with slight embarrassment. Shen Wangqing seized on him like a drowning woman reaching shore. Her tears fell harder as she prepared to stage one last scene of a wronged younger sister before him. Your Highness, please judge fairly, elder sister Shi Qingdai. I could not be bothered to look at her again. I turned toward the inner room. This servant is here. Bring a broom, show our guest out. Shen Wenqing's eyes widened. Elder sister, I am truly exhausted today. I rubbed my aching wrist without turning back. I have no strength left to watch another performance. Go, after Shen Wenqing was firmly escorted away. Silence returned to the courtyard. Xiao Yanheng was still standing by the door. I did not look at him. I went to the table and opened a ledger. Has your Highness heard enough from outside my wall? Any lofty judgment to offer. He was silent so long that I thought he meant to retreat into that familiar, stubborn quiet. Then he spoke, low and plain. Before, I truly disliked you very much. My fingers tightened on the paper. An old ache in this body's heart stirred, despite everything. Knowing a thing was one matter, hearing the man himself say it was another. I kept my head down. I know. But I must also admit that I never seriously examined the people around you. I was blind. At last I looked up. Those are separate matters. Your Highness need not force them together. I know. He stepped forward and took a stack of deeds from his sleeve, each bearing fresh official seals and handprints. He placed them gently over my ledger. The Court of Judicial Review has finished separating every property that belonged to your birth mother. Prince Ning's household will not touch so much as one copper coin of it. His gaze remains steady on mine. These are yours. Let them be the ground beneath your feet. I stared at deeds, at the wealth and freedom they represented. The breath that had been trapped in Shen Mingtang's chest for 3 years seemed finally to leave, little by little. Xiao Yanheng. It was the first time since arriving in this world that I had called him by name. Something shifted in his dark eyes. He looked up fully. "Thank you." He did not answer with his usual stiff dismissal. He simply looked at me for a moment, then gave the smallest nod. The man was often difficult. He had no gift for pretty speeches. For the first time, I found I preferred action to sweet words. After reclaiming the 3 prosperous shops my birth mother had left me, the first thing I did was not rush to renovate them. I sat alone in one empty shop for an entire afternoon and stared at the walls. It had been easy to declare that I would open my own eating house. Holding the deeds in my hand made reality far less romantic. The stoves had to be rebuilt. The flues needed craftsmen. Tables and benches had to be ordered. Cooks and servers had to be hired. I needed reliable sources for grain, oil, salt, vegetables, and meat. Worst of all, I had to set prices. Yes, I had run a restaurant in my former life, but there I had known exactly where to find suppliers, what rules governed a shop, and how fresh goods could be delivered over distance. Here I had an abacus, and a cloth merchant next door who, whenever he caught sight of me, dropped to his knees and cried, "Long life to the princess consort." The first time he did it, my hand jerked so badly I nearly struck him with the golden abacus. In the end, I had my newly hired manager hang a large wooden sign beside the door. "All who enter to dine are guests, highborn or humble. No kneeling is required." When Xiao Jinghang came to inspect the progress, he studied the sign for a long while. If we come in plain clothes to eat noodles, no kneeling? None. And if Imperial grandfather comes? I considered that seriously. His Majesty had better not. If his guards seal the street, I will lose an entire day's trade. Some loose-tongued attendant later carried those words back to the palace. The second time the emperor came to Prince Ning's residence in disguise for a meal, he stared at me for a long while and snorted. So we are spared kneeling as well. I lowered my head and concentrated fiercely on my rice. The eating house is small. If everyone keeps dropping to the floor, someone will overturn the blue and white bowls I just bought. They cost a great deal. The emperor laughed despite himself, and astonishingly decided this crooked reasoning made perfect sense. I named the eating house 10 Flavors House. The night before opening, I tossed and turned so badly that I lit the lamp 3 separate times to check the menu: minced pork and tofu over rice. 12 copper cash plain noodles with scallion oil, 8. Cabbage stewed with thick slices of pork. 15 house braised chicken leg, extra. For anyone eating inside, 1 refill of hot bone broth without charge. The prices were not the cheapest in the capital, but the portions and ingredients were honest. On that point, I had complete confidence. The next morning, we opened our doors. No one came, not one living customer. The street outside bustled from one end to the other. Plenty of people slowed before our shining new sign. They peered inside at me behind the counter, still full-figured though healthier than before. Then they noticed several broad, intimidating guards from Prince Ning's household standing nearby as protection. Every single passerby suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. I sat behind the counter from dawn until the sun climbed high, stiff as a stone woman waiting for a husband lost at sea. The fragrant minced pork and tofu in the kitchen was nearly cold enough to set into a block. Qingde paced anxiously at the door. "Your Highness, perhaps this servant could return to the estate and ask the steward to send several dozen servants in plain clothes. They could fill a few tables and make the place look lively." "Absolutely not. But if this continues, the food will spoil. It is the first day, beginnings are always difficult." I clung desperately to the dignity of a proper proprietor. Ordinary people are cautious. That is natural. Inside, I had already cursed the location, the prices, the sign, the lettering, and every choice on the menu 100 times over by afternoon. Doubt had dug in deep. Perhaps common folk simply did not dare enter an eating house owned by a princess consort, and perhaps the highborn despised my homely dishes as beneath their tables. I had somehow planted myself squarely between 2 worlds and pleased neither. I slumped over the rosewood counter and poked a dish of cold fermented tofu with my chopsticks. The rear curtain lifted. Xiao Yanheng entered through the back door in a dark, understated brocade robe. No customers. He glanced across the empty hall. I gave him a flat look. Your Highness possesses remarkable eyes. Do you regret spending the money? The answer came far too quickly. He pulled out a chair and sat opposite me, his voice as calm as if discussing the weather. Then, if there is no trade, close for today, open again tomorrow. My temper flared. Must you speak so calmly every time that a person wants to strike you? One brow rose. How should this prince behave, hold you and weep? You could at least say something pleasant. Tell me business will improve sooner or later. If I said that, would you believe me? I rolled my eyes. Number then close for today, fight again tomorrow. I glared at him, and to my deep annoyance found no sensible argument against it. I was just about to tell the staff to put up the shutters, when half a man appeared cautiously in the doorway. He wore coarse work clothes with a towel over one shoulder. From his thick arms and sun-darkened skin, he looked like a porter from the docks. He hovered for a long moment before speaking. Mistress, can a man truly come in here and eat? I shot upright behind the counter. Yes, of course. He swallowed and felt his nearly empty purse. What is the cheapest thing you serve? A large bowl of plain scallion oil noodles, 8 copper cash. He still hesitated. I do heavy work. I eat a lot. Will it fill me? The bowl is generous, and you get hot bone broth besides. You will leave full. His face brightened. Then give me one? I cooked that first bowl myself. Not for ceremony, my hands had been itching all day, and at last I had someone to feed. Noodles into rolling water, lift drain bowl, then 1 spoonful of scallion oil, cooked until fragrant, poured over the tops SSH. The warm scent of sauce and toasted scallion rose in a rush of steam. The porter ate like a starving man, scarcely lifting his head. In a few great mouthfuls, the bowl was empty. He pushed it forward, clearly reluctant for the meal to end. Mistress, you said the soup can be refilled. Yes. I had a server bring him a full bowl of bone broth scattered with chopped scallions. He drained it, wiped his mouth, then turned back at the door. You opening tomorrow too? I fought to keep the corners of my mouth from rising. Every day, good. I will bring 2 brothers from the docks. Your noodles give a man more for his coin than Widow Zhang's stall. At noon the next day, he returned with 2 men just as sturdy as himself. On the 3rd day, they brought 7 fellow workers. By the 5th day, 10 Flavors House filled every table at noon for the first time. I stood in the steam-filled kitchen, listening to servers call from the hall. 2 more bowls of rice for table 3. Table 5 is asking for the braised chicken leg. On the outside, I was calm enough to direct the cooks and correct the fires. Then I slipped into the storeroom to fetch garlic, shut the door, leaned back against it, and punched 1 fist triumphantly into the air. Yes. A door creaked open from inside the storeroom. Chingday stood there, holding a basket of cabbages. We stared at one another. 2 breaths passed. I lowered my hand with perfect dignity and rolled my shoulders. The kitchen is hot. I was loosening my neck and arms. Chingday bit her lower lip until her smile disappeared. Of course, Your Highness. 10 Flavors House did not become famous overnight as storybooks like to claim. We had days of endless rain when not a single diner came. We had the glorious disaster of an accountant confusing expensive fine salt with coarse salt and selling dishes at a loss. We even had a newly hired cook become so nervous that she left an enormous pot of rice half raw just before the dock workers' midday rush. That afternoon, I stood at the kitchen door with both hands on my hips for half an incense stick, too angry to speak. In the end, I rolled up my sleeves, spread out the ruined rice, and turned the whole lot into fried rice. We survived. Reputation did not fall from heaven. It gathered 1 honest bowl at a time through the streets and alleys. Porters came for minced pork over rice shop assistants. From nearby stores came in groups at noon for hot noodles. Eventually, even the wives of officials who prided themselves on refinement began sending maids and older servants by carriage to the rear door for our braised chicken legs. They would cover their noses with silk handkerchiefs and complain. Street food is so rich. One eats too much and the waste suffers. Then they would lean toward the server and whisper, "Wrap the two largest and add 2 more spoonfuls of the braising sauce." Once the eating house stood firmly on its feet, I rented the shop next door and opened a small cookery school for ordinary women. The women who came to learn were all adults who had already tasted hardship. Some wanted a trade so they could push a cart through the streets and feed themselves. Some hoped to find work cutting and preparing ingredients in a large tavern kitchen. Others simply wanted to understand accounts well enough that a dishonest employer could no longer cheat them of their wages merely because they were women. I taught them how to judge fresh ingredients, how to cut and season, and how to read the most tangled purchase and inventory ledgers. If a dish looks beautiful, smells good, and tastes even better, that will keep a customer's stomach loyal. I told the dozens of eager faces before me, tapping the rim of an iron wok with my spatula. But if you cannot calculate what the dish costs you, the more customers you serve, the faster you will lose every coin you own. Do not spend your whole life waiting for a man to feed you. Coin in your own hand steadies the heart. That lesson had been carved into me through years of smoke, heat, and hard-earned losses in my former life. In this life, I believed it even more. As 10 Flavors House grew busier, I spent every day on my feet. Without any grand miracle, the body that had once been swollen and sick began to change. There was no absurd transformation overnight. For a long time, I would stand before the bronze mirror and think my figure hardly looked different at all. But the soft swelling that once held a dent at the slightest pressure slowly disappeared. The gray pallor left my face, replaced by a healthy warmth. At first, the walk from Prince Ning's residence to 10 Flavors House required 3 rests. I would arrive breathless and drenched in sweat. Then I needed 2. Then 1. Now I could walk the whole distance without stopping and still spend the morning standing in the kitchen with enough strength to command everyone else. I still grew tired, but it was an honest kind of tiredness. Of course, even the steadiest heart has days when it cracks. One autumn afternoon, rain kept most customers away. I crouched beside the stove, watching an old duck soup simmer slowly, when 2 women came beneath the eaves to escape the weather. One peered inside and laughed under her breath. "I heard this place belongs to Princess Consort Ning. She may be capable now, but look at her, still so broad and full-figured. Where is the grace of a noble lady?" The careless remark slipped into my ear like a fine needle. My hands stopped over the stove. At exact moment, a drop of hot oil jumped from the pan and landed squarely on the back of my hand, raising a blister. Something in me snapped. All at once, I wanted to do nothing. Truly nothing. I threw the spatula onto the work table and dropped heavily onto a low stool beside the stove. All my fine speeches about standing on one's own feet, all my brave declarations about independence, vanished from my mind. I only felt wronged, irritated, exhausted, absurdly wronged. I had worked so hard, I rose before dawn. I rebuilt my health. I untangled accounts. I had fed half the capital at one time or another. Why, in this cursed world, did strangers still look at me and judge my body before they saw anything else? A tall shadow blocked the kitchen light. At some point, Xiao Yanheng had entered from the front hall. He looked at my reddened eyes, then at the abandoned spatula on the work table. He offered no grand wisdom. He did not tell me that I was already beautiful enough or that I should ignore idle tongues. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his priceless shoe brocade, walked to the stove, picked up the fire poker, and expertly stirred the dying coals back to life. Then he added 2 pieces of dry wood. I sniffed and looked up at him. "You are a prince. When did you learn to tend a kitchen fire?" He watched the flames. "After watching you cook for more than half a year, one learns." My nose stung sharply, tears slipped out before I could stop them. Pathetic. I lowered my head at once and wiped my face with the back of my hand, fixing my eyes on the simmering iron pot. "We are not having duck soup tonight. We are having braised fish." "Very well." "You wash the fish and scrape off the scales." "Very well, and do not touch the scallions. Leave those to me." At last, he frowned and turned toward me. "Why, this prince can cut scallions." I remembered the last time he had helped in the kitchen. One length of a perfectly good scallion had come out thick as firewood. The next had been thin enough for embroidery. Somehow, my terrible mood broke apart. Because scallions and pampered princes are enemies by fate, heaven did not mean you to meet. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at my tear-streaked smile, and a faint smile appeared in his own eyes. This prince understands. Another night, long after 10 Flavors House had closed, the two of us sat alone in the empty dining room checking the day's accounts. Without warning, he asked, "Mingtang, if we could set aside those first 3 years and begin again, would you be willing?" I happened to be holding a half-finished dumpling. My thumb had just pinched the final neat pleat into place. I did not answer at once. To say I felt nothing for a man who had grown steadier, deeper, and far more capable of respecting me would have been a lie. But the old Shen Mingtang had staked every joy, every grief, every piece of her life on this one man. That was how she had lost herself entirely. I had fought too hard to stand on my own feet in this world. I would not see a little tenderness from him, burst into grateful tears, and place every card I owned back onto the gambling table called the inner household. I set the finished dumpling carefully on the bamboo tray and turned to meet his gaze. "That depends on how your highness behaves from now on." Xiao Yanheng looked at me and nodded solemnly. "Very well. Now I was the one left speechless. That is all," I asked. "What else?" "In storybooks, when a man reaches this part, even if he is pretending, he should say something about never wanting another woman, never failing me again, loving me for the rest of his life, some grand oath." His gaze was perfectly clear. "If I filled the room with sweet promises now, would you believe even half a sentence?" I choked on my answer. "Number than what use are empty words. I will not say them. I will show you instead." I stared at him for a long while. His complete lack of romance had somehow defeated me more thoroughly than any speech could have. At last I sighed and shoved an enormous bowl of risen dough toward him. "If you intend to show me, begin tonight, roll the dumpling wrappers." He showed not the slightest displeasure. Once again he rolled up his sleeves and picked up the small rolling pin, polished smooth from use. "You are not permitted to complain this time that mine are too thick on one side and too thin on the other." I folded my arms and snorted. "That depends on what horrors you commit against the dough." 2 years later, with the court settled and the realm at peace, Xiao Jingheng had shed the last traces of youth and grown even steadier and more restrained. At last, he was to return formally to the Eastern Palace and take up residence there as the acknowledged heir. On the morning of his departure, the young man who would one day inherit Great Sheng lingered at the back kitchen of 10 Flavors House for nearly half an hour like a child reluctant to leave a sweet shop. "Aunt." He looked as though he had something grave to say. "What is it?" "Your carriage has been waiting outside forever." I was busy packing freshly cooked dishes into food boxes. The shepherd's purse dumplings made by the imperial kitchen are scarcely fit to enter the mouth. If the chief of the imperial kitchen heard you say that, he would collapse beside his stove in tears. "We speak only the truth." He lifted his chin with immaculate royal pride. I laughed and shook my head, then pushed 2 3-tiered food boxes into his arms. "Take these, it should last you 2 days." Xiao Yanheng stood nearby with a cold expression and exposed him without mercy. "You are returning to the palace as heir to the realm, not being exiled to the frontier. Must you behave like a starving ghost?" Xiao Jingheng held the food boxes easily in one hand and gave his uncle a calm look. Imperial uncle is fed year after year on aunt's own soups and dishes. A man with a full stomach cannot understand the suffering of the hungry. Xiao Yanheng's face darkened like the bottom of an old iron pot. I leaned against the doorway and laughed so hard I nearly knocked over the vase beside me. As for the most exalted old gentleman under heaven, the emperor eventually developed a lasting habit of visiting 10 Flavors House every few days in disguise to observe the lives of the people. The first time he made a proper show of it, dressing as a wealthy merchant in ordinary silk. Latter, he could not even be bothered. He would throw a cloak over his imperial yellow robe, bring a handful of guards dressed as common men, and sit down in the dining hall as though no one could possibly recognize him. One afternoon, the last plate of steaming shepherd's purse dumplings had just reached the table. Xiao Jingheng moved first and seized the largest with his chopsticks. The emperor, vigorous despite his years, attacked from both sides and took two at once. I refused to be left behind and snatched one for myself. By the time Xiao Yanheng extended his chopsticks with his usual measured calm, they struck the empty plate with a lonely click. He looked at the spotless dish. Then, at me. Where is mine? Prince Ning's question carried the weight of a man confronting the injustice of the heavens. I was drinking radish soup and did not raise my head. There is still a bowl of mixed dough on the kitchen table. And, if your highness is still hungry, go to the kitchen and wrap your own dumplings. The emperor failed to contain himself and burst into laughter, stroking his beard. Even Xiao Jingheng showed an unmistakable smile. In the end, Xiao Yanheng sighed, surrendered to fate, and truly went into the kitchen. Night settled over the capital. The noise of the streets slowly faded, and warm lanterns glowed in the courtyard. The manager of 10 Flavors House had just delivered the day's final accounts. Tomorrow I still had to test several new dishes with the cooks. The great jars of house sauce fermenting in the rear courtyard were due to be stirred again. Every morning I opened my eyes to another mountain of small, ordinary troubles. Yet, standing beneath the autumn sky, breathing in the cool night air, I suddenly thought this life was not bad at all. When I first arrived in this world, I was the notorious unwanted princess consort the entire capital used as a joke. At the beginning, all I wanted inside that cold princely estate was one bowl of plain porridge that would not make my stomach ache. Then I tried making a bowl of scallion noodles. I wrapped a pot full of misshapen wontons. I sat awake deep into the night until my eyes burned an untangled account book after account book designed to swallow me whole. With the one skill I had carried from my former life, I pulled myself inch by inch from the mud and reclaimed one shop after another that had always been mine. Later still, a line began forming outside 10 Flavors House every day. People who once mocked me behind my back, people who had once thrown cruel words as casually as stones, now stood patiently in that same line and craned their necks toward the kitchen. Someone would shout across the noisy dining hall, "Your Highness, can we have another bowl of the house meatball soup today?" Laughing, I walked to the great iron pot and lifted the heavy wooden lid. Milky white steam billowed upward and wrapped around my face. Yes, same rule as always. Bring your own big bowl and fill it. The rear door opened behind me. Xiao Yanheng strode in carrying a bamboo basket of fresh greens he had just bought from the evening market. "Mingtang?" he called. "What are we eating tonight?" I turned, looked at the handsome face that somehow remained noble, even with the smoke and warmth of ordinary life around it, then pointed toward the grass carp still flapping on the work table. Less talking, wash the vegetables first. He did not argue. With the ease of long habit, he rolled up his sleeves and walked toward the basin. I watched his back and smiled, all at once at peace. In this life, I did not believe in miraculous gifts falling from heaven. Nor did I believe in the fairy tale of a woman becoming powerful overnight because a man chose to rescue her. I simply used the same two hands that had spent years holding a spatula, and in this strange world, fed myself until I was strong enough to stand. As for the years still ahead, a meal is eaten one bite at a time, a road is walked one step at a time. We can take the rest slowly. The story ends with her standing in the kitchen, steam around her face, her husband washing vegetables, and the emperor and imperial grandson fighting over her dumplings. But the real victory isn't the reclaimed shops or the throne's favor. It is the moment she stops waiting to be fed. That is what this story is really about. The world told her she was too much and too little at the same time. Her husband ignored her. Her family spoon fed her sugar to keep her sick. Everyone expected her to shrink into a corner and be grateful for scraps. She doesn't try to prove them wrong. She just goes into the kitchen. She burns her first porridge. She fumbles the palace stove. Strangers still mock her body. Old cravings still crawl back under her skin. But she keeps cooking, not to impress anyone, but to feed herself, to build a life that belongs to her. That is the quiet rebellion. She didn't become strong because a prince saved her. She became strong because she picked up the one skill she'd always had and used it to stand on her own 2 feet. And when her husband finally asks if they can begin again, she doesn't dissolve into grateful tears. She says, "That depends on how you behave from now on." Then she hands him the dough. That is the kind of love worth staying for. No grand oaths, just someone who rolls up his sleeves and helps. So here is my question for you. What is your kitchen? The skill you already have. The appetite you've been hiding, the thing you've been told isn't important or isn't becoming. And what would change if you stopped waiting for permission and started feeding yourself one honest bowl? One small step, one meal at a time. Tell me in the comments. I am Xiao Yu Mei. Every burned porridge teach you something. May every honest bowl keep you warm. And may you never again wait for someone else to decide you've earned your meal. See you in the next story.